From the Cronkite Studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News. I'm Courtney Malley. Part of our news mission is to bring comprehensive public policy reporting to the state of Arizona. And Cronkite News is the only news organization in the state with a dedicated bureau in Washington, D.C. Tonight, we highlight some of our top stories from the nation's capital, from the controversy over new policies from the Trump administration to key Arizona issues up for debate on Capitol Hill.
Latino Democrats in Congress are pushing for the DREAM Act to protect DACA recipients. Nearly 30,000 people in Arizona are protected from deportation under DACA, but the Trump administration wants to end the program in less than 6 months. Cronkite News reporter Adrian St. Clair has the latest in our Washington bureau.
Democrats Raul Grijalva from Arizona and Luis Gutierrez from Illinois told Dreamers last week that Democrats are prepared to use the budget as leverage to pass the DREAM Act swiftly. Gutierrez spoke passionately in support of Dreamers and said he refuses to give up the fight, even though the Republicans outnumber the Democrats in both the House and the Senate.
We do not have to pay ransom to the hostage takers, nor we will pay it.
He emphasized that Republicans still need Democratic support.
I remind everybody here today, they walked away, 90 of them. They didn't pass the budget with a majority of Republicans. Their proposal, they didn't pass it. Debt ceiling, Harvey, nothing. They need Democrats.
Grijalva said there will be significant consequences if there's no movement on a Clean DREAM Act starting in September, but by December at the latest.
The consequences are that that budget without Democratic support doesn't pass, the debt ceiling it doesn't get risen, and then we have another drama on our hands.
DACA recipients filled the room, shouting their commitment to their futures.
Here to stay! Here to stay!
Former Phoenix resident Hugo Juarez came to D.C. to talk to lawmakers about the DREAM Act and tell his story. He says keeping the essence of DACA in place is an issue of basic human rights, and he will stand and fight.
I don't think any human being should be deciding on how to live our lives. That we should be in fear of our lives. And I'm like, I'm not gonna hide. I think I hid for 10 years when I was in Phoenix, and I'm not gonna hide anymore.
In Washington, Adrian St. Clair, Cronkite News.
All 4 Democrats in Arizona's delegation have signed on to the House version of the DREAM Act of 2017. The Senate version of the bill has drawn bipartisan backing, including the support of Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake.
Hurricanes aren't the only types of weather that wreak havoc, and coastal cities aren't the only ones that need to be prepared. That was one message Arizona official took to Washington this week. Cronkite News reporter Bailey Vogt has the story from our Washington bureau.
Scenes like this that have been playing out on the Gulf Coast will likely never be seen in Arizona, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare for other natural disasters, said the Flagstaff sustainability manager.
Look at challenges that Intermountain West communities are facing. So we're not having conversations only about sea level, which we hear a lot, but we're talking about fire and drought and extreme temperature changes.
Nicole Woodman speaks from experience. After an active year of natural disasters in 2010, she headed a disaster resilience program. Woodman was invited to present this successful model at an extreme weather preparedness panel in Washington.
How can the city organization reduce its vulnerability and build organizational resilience to climate variability and climate-related issues? And more importantly, what are the risks if we don't act?
Faced with crises like hurricanes, or in Flagstaff's case, forest fires, Woodman says that the best way for cities to implement these programs is support from all parts of the community.
Success is only going to be achieved with our community members involved, our political leaders taking action, and us creating an identity around our actions.
Woodman said in the panel that they are seeing increased activity in their weather and need to figure out new solutions to handle it.
We have to figure out how to deal with the intensity of our storms. They are getting stronger. We're seeing a lot more flooding, again, seasonal flooding in our community.
In Washington, Bailey Vogt, Cronkite News.
A hunter's rights bill that's advancing in Congress would ease some regulations on hunting on federal lands. But the firearms language in the bill is drawing fire from gun control groups. Washington Bureau reporter Trevor Fay was there for the congressional hearing before the bill heads to the House floor.
It's supposed to be about hunters' rights. But critics of the SHARE Act say it's little more than a cover to deregulate sales of armor-piercing bullets and silencers, and they refuse to remain silent at a House hearing today.
Should silencers be removed from the NFA, individuals unable to pass a background check would be able to obtain these dangerous weapons through unregulated private sales on the internet and at gun shows.
Chipman, a former agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, was supported by Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva, who said Chipman was being disregarded due to the influence of gun manufacturers.
You know, I find it curious that we all love cops, Mr. Shipman, and then the minute a career law enforcement officer comes to this committee and tells us what we are doing in this legislation is dangerous for public safety, suddenly that credibility is lost.
But supporters of the SHARE Act say it will let law-abiding hunters protect their hearing with silencers and preserve the culture of American hunters. Representative Ruben Gallego was dubious about that claim.
How is this actually going to help hunters in terms of being able to be going through the woods if you have people having suppressors essentially on their rifles? And I just don't understand what is the logic somehow that this is going to bring safety to hunters.
Attorney Stephen Halbrook says that it is easy to make silencers and that criminals will not be dissuaded from using them simply because of federal regulation. In Washington, Trevor Fay, Cronkite News.
An Arizona pastor who planned a fast in support of DACA is continuing his efforts in the nation's capital with a slightly different tone. Reporter Fraser Allen best explains from our Washington bureau.
I only did 1 day solidarity fast because there is a lot of work to be done now, and so I have to try to keep a clear head.
That work has shifted from defending DACA, which President Trump said he will eliminate, to getting a vote on the DREAM Act. The same Methodist groups that occupied the streets are taking to the halls of Congress.
All of this is based in the United Methodist Building, with positions, advocates like Reverend Anderson and others from Arizona right across from Capitol Hill.
From a modest base on the main floor, they plan their approach. Randy Mayer, like Anderson, is from Sahuarita.
Going to a meeting right now with the staff of Senator Flake to continue to push for the Clean Dreamer bill.
Reverend Anderson is clear that a quieter approach does not mean slowing down, just shifting gears.
And we've gone to the Trump Hotel and the Department of Justice and the ICE headquarters. And when it comes to Congress, we're in a sense in a different timeline in terms of how we put pressure on these elected officials.
The Reverend and DACA recipient Valeria Ruiz have a face-to-face with Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. Still, Ruiz says none of these negotiations take overt protest off the table.
Doing a fast again or mobilizing all 800,000 documented folks here to D.C., then that's definitely what we're going to do.
For now, Anderson plans to continue to push for the DREAM Act, stopping occasionally for meals. Fraser Allen Best, Cronkite News, Washington.
It was advertised as the mother of all rallies. It called on Americans to gather in Washington to show support for President Donald Trump. Cronkite News reporter Adrienne St. Clair caught up with Arizonans on the National Mall.
Hundreds of people from across the country attended the Mother of All rallies on the National Mall in Washington. While the goal of the event was to show support for President Trump, speakers and supporters had some choice words for Arizona Senators John McCain and Jeff Flake.
Glendale resident Tawny Gonzalez agreed with one speaker who called for McCain's resignation and endorsed Flake's challenger, Kelly Ward.
Jeff Flake will be replaced by Kelly Ward, and we need McCrazy out of there. He's a traitor to our country. He's a traitor to our state. He does not represent Arizonans.
Concerns with the senators were not the only Arizona issues here. People from all over brought up immigration, DACA, and the recent pardon of former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, which New Yorker Brian Elbaz called the right thing to do.
Because I'm glad that he got pardoned because he was doing his job and doing it well.
Nearby, a small group of opponents included Bruce Gomer. He'd been in Charlottesville, Virginia last month. where Heather Heyer was killed protesting racism and white supremacy.
That's why I came here, to be sure that I stand up for, what happened in Charlottesville, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists. You can call them whatever you want, patriots, but I want them to know that we're watching them and they're not going to, ever take over this country.
Gomer said this event was nothing like Charlottesville. When Black Lives Matter protesters showed up, for example, rally organizers invited them on stage to speak briefly. That's an opportunity that Gonzalez said she and others at the rally don't often get from mainstream and social media.
Okay, so what's going on is a lot of the patriots are under attack right now, and anything that they say that it's offensive to the left, they completely ban them for 30 days.
But for this one day, people here said it felt good to stand with like-minded people, what Gonzalez called her fellow deplorables. That included former Arizona resident and Tea Party organizer Jim Griffin.
I'm not stopping till I'm in the ground. And when I go, I'll be a proud American in the ground for God and country, Christianity, capitalism, and the U.S. Constitution.
On the National Mall in Washington, Adrienne St. Clair, Cronkite News.
Every September 17th, the U.S. celebrates the anniversary of our Constitution.
But we the people don't seem to know a whole lot about Constitution Day, as Cronkite News reporter Fraser Allen Best in our Washington bureau found out.
How did you spend your Constitution Day? If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, you're not alone. I talked to people walking out of the National Archives, where the Constitution is permanently on display, and even they drew a blank on the day.
I didn't remember the date until I was in the National Archives.
No idea that was happening today at all.
I actually found out on Facebook, but yes, I knew as of about 10 o'clock this morning.
Sunday was officially known as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. Well, Citizenship Day has been around for a long time. Constitution Day was added in 2004, aimed at educating Americans about the historic document. Ilya Shapiro is Senior Fellow in Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. He said, "The day is important, but not as important as the document the day is supposed to remind Americans of."
It's less important that on any one particular day that people think about the Constitution. I mean, for me, of course, every day is Constitution Day. It's what I do for a living.
Shapiro said Cato has distributed 5 or 6 million copies of the Constitution in recent years, but he's optimistic that the day is reaching people.
I'm hoping it's right up there with at least Arbor Day or Flag Day or something like that.
Speaking to Americans outside the National Archives, that feeling is shared.
I actually wasn't aware that there was a Constitution Day, but I'm all for it.
In Washington, Fraser Allen Best, Cronkite News.
I'm Jose Cardenas, host of Horizonte. Each week, we bring you experts and community leaders to discuss the issues that are vital to our community here in Arizona. We cover the stories that affect and inspire us and our families, and talk to the newsmakers who shape the communities where we live. Horizonte is your source and your voice for what matters most here on Arizona PBS.
Rising cases of sex trafficking have the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation looking for a legislative fix. Cronkite News reporter Trevor Fay went to the Senate Committee hearing this morning to get the story.
Tweaking the Communications Decency Act may sound like legalese, but backers say those tweaks could help in the prosecution of online sex traffickers. Cindy McCain is a proponent of the changes and says children's lives are at stake.
Child sexual exploitation and child rape, which is what it is tragic. And that people are getting away with it because of a kink in a law is absolutely despicable.
Senators heard emotional testimony from Yvonne Ambrose, whose daughter was killed in Chicago last Christmas Eve, a victim of sex trafficking.
The sex trafficking of minors should not be happening in our country. Taking advantage of our children on the internet has become such a common thing in this country that people turn the other cheek just because they don't want to believe it's actually happening right here in our backyard.
Senate Bill 1693 is aimed at modifying the Communications Act of 1934 to allow for federal and local prosecutors to go after those who would peddle online sex trafficking on the internet, specifically providers and users of interactive computer services. California Attorney General Javier Becerra is in favor of the bill and says as it stands, state prosecutors don't have the authority to go after online sex traffickers in court.
The Section 230 protection makes it impossible for us to move forward on some of those prosecutions. If we could get past that we would be able to help so many of these kids so much quicker.
Some, like law professor Eric Goldman, testified the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act is not necessary to fight online trafficking, and that it could actually further its proliferation. But McCain remains optimistic that the Senate can change the law.
I'm so glad that the Senate has decided to get active on changing the CDA.
In Washington, Trevor Fay, Cronkite News.
The Senate bill already has 29 co-sponsors, including Arizona Senators Jeff Flake and John McCain.
Arizona shipped $8.3 billion in exports to Mexico last year and another $2 billion to Canada. Supporters say that's one benefit of the North American Free Trade Agreement. At a forum in Washington today, experts, including former Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, looked at what could happen if NAFTA is renegotiated. Cronkite News reporter Trevor Fay in our Washington bureau was there.
Former Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano has concerns about the current negotiations on the North American Free Trade Agreement, but she has bigger concerns about those negotiations falling apart.
There is an urgency to this topic, given troubling comments from the current administration about terminating NAFTA altogether.
President Donald Trump has threatened to throw out the free trade deal between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico if a new deal is not negotiated. But panelists at an event here today all agreed that negotiation can and must work out for the three nations.
We see huge opportunities in the renegotiation of the NAFTA, and in those opportunities, the possibility that we will be able to evolve a North American trade and economic partnership that is truly reflective of the 21st century.
DeQuino says he and his countrymen have high hopes for the renegotiated deal and said the ultimate goal of NAFTA should be allowing all three nations to compete better in the global marketplace. Former Mexican ambassador to the U.S., Arturo Shakurin, agreed that negotiation is the best option, but he is more skeptical about the avenue to get there.
I do believe that you never let a good crisis go to waste, and the crises that was opened by Trump throwing the TPP out the window, which would have modernized and upgraded NAFTA through the back door without actually having to open Pandora's box and renegotiate NAFTA.
Napolitano stressed that NAFTA has been very valuable to the U.S., and she said the alternative is not an attractive one.
The growth in trade has meant growth in jobs in the United States during the pendency of NAFTA. So to lose NAFTA would be to lose, that economic benefit.
In Washington, Trevor Fay, Cronkite News.
Many World War II veterans have never had the chance to visit the memorial honoring them in the nation's capital. However, a few Arizona veterans received the opportunity to change that. Let's turn to Bailey Vogt from our Cronkite Bureau in Washington, D.C. for the story.
Almost 75 years after the end of World War II, Arizona resident Arlie Matthews looked upon his memorial in Washington for the first time.
I don't know. I can't express my feelings. It's good to see they remember us.
Matthews was joined by more than 20 World War II veterans from Arizona on an honor flight to Washington. Like Matthews, many of them were experiencing the World War II memorial for the first time, including Pat Carbine from Scottsdale.
Well, this was my first time, and I thought it was a wonderful experience. I'm glad we came, yes. And my son came with me, which made it extra special.
The trip was provided by Honor Flight Arizona, which honors veterans with a trip to see Washington, D.C. Karen Friddle, a coordinator of the trip, was excited that this group was made up entirely of World War II veterans.
As everyone knows, we're running out of our World War II veterans, so it's a really special thing when we can bring a whole plane of World War II veterans with us.
Carbine said that the memorial gave her a great reflective experience on serving her country in the past and possibly present.
At the time, I was young and I was glad to do it. I might even do it again, except I'm not young anymore.
From Washington, Bailey Vogt, Cronkite News.
Arizona Congressman Trent Franks said he will reintroduce a bill that would ban most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Cronkite News reporter Fraser Allen Best was at the U.S. Capitol today for Franks' announcement.
For God's sakes, ladies and gentlemen, this cannot be who we truly are.
That's why Congressman Trent Franks says he will introduce, again, his Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. The bill would outlaw abortion after 20 weeks, when abortion opponents say a fetus is capable of feeling pain. It's at least the third time Franks has introduced the bill. but he said he will continue to push the measure as long as it takes.
I heard the story of a championship rain dance group, and they never failed to make it rain. And someone asked them how they did it. They said, well, we dance till it rains. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
Marjorie Dannenfelser is president of the Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life nonprofit. She feels that this time, pointing to the pro-life rhetoric of the Trump campaign, the tone around the pro-life movement is different.
It's been huge, of course, that the President of the United States has made this central. I talked to him about it last night, actually.
While hopeful, Dannenfelser acknowledges that it's still a challenge to get the 60 votes needed to get it through the Senate, where it has failed repeatedly.
Will we get to 60 votes? I think it would take a little bit of a miracle, but I do know that that very pressure in those states will lead to the election of new senators who will build our vote total for the next time around.
Preparing to introduce the bill once more, Franks is hopeful that with each time around, he's closer to passing it.
This bill will be passed on the floor of the House, and will at some point be passed in the U.S. Senate. And this sunlight of freedom that you and I are standing will shine on the faces of the unborn in America again.
In Washington, Fraser Allen Best, Cronkite News.
A spokeswoman for Planned Parenthood of Arizona said courts and public opinion are on the side of pro-choice. She said Franks' latest bill is no different from any of his previous ones, and she predicted that it would meet the same fate.
It's been a big year for wildfires in the U.S., where more than 7 million acres have already burned as of August. And it's been a big week for wildfire talk in Washington. Reporter Bailey Vogt sat in on the hearings on how to bring fires under control.
We're not going to stop all the fires, but I do believe we can stop a lot of these 100,000-acre fires that we see here by building some breaks in some areas by good forest management.
The good forest management he is referring to requires going in and removing excess fuel that can feed a fire once it starts. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake says dead wood needs to be removed and new growth trimmed back, but that it's not happening fast enough.
When you look at some of the acreage, we really need to be thinning about 50,000 acres a year. And we're not even close to that.
Flake says bureaucracy is also getting in the way.
When you look at some of the acreage in our ponderosa pine forest that should have 25, 40 trees per acre, and you're looking at 200, 300, 400 trees, it's just too much.
Environmentalists worry that Congress may push too far in the other direction. The Center for Biological Diversity says some lawmakers are using a bad wildfire season as an excuse to loosen environmental protections to the benefit of loggers. In Washington, Bailey Vogt, Cronkite News.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake delivered a strong message on the need for cooperation in tackling important issues like immigration. The senator sat down for an interview at the Washington Ideas Conference. Reporter Fraser Allen Best takes us there.
It was more than 5 years ago when Arizona Senator Jeff Flake helped former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords in a halting return to Congress after she survived a near-fatal shooting. For Flake, the story is still relevant today.
She was a Democrat, and I'm a Republican. She wanted to stand up when President Obama would have the applause lines, but she couldn't stand up on her own very well, so I helped her up, which left me a lone Republican standing.
Lone Republican standing is not an uncommon position for Flake, who has found himself sometimes at odds with his party in the past year. He didn't back down today at the Washington Idea Forum.
Today, I think the party's been compromised by populism, isolationism, by anti-immigration fervor, nativism, and I don't think that it may excite certain people, and you might be able to win an election. It's called populism for a reason. It's popular sometimes, but it's not a governing philosophy.
Flake, who made the call for civility central to his recent book, Conscience of a Conservative, spoke right after Nancy Pelosi, a fierce partisan, but one who was able to negotiate recently with President Donald Trump.
He's the president of the United States, and if we can find our common ground, now we want to. And the Dreamers have so much support in the country.
As he took the stage after Pelosi, Flake cited immigration as one of the many issues where Democrats and Republicans can't start a healthy discussion by viewing each other as opponents. Stressing the theme of his book, Flake says incivility makes for bad politics.
And my big concern is that if we continue to vilify and assign bad motives to the other side, then we'll never solve the big issues that we need to solve. And
in Washington, Fraser Allen Best, Cronkite News.
There are 500,000 diesel school buses across the country, each one emitting fumes that can pose a threat to school children. Cronkite News reporter Trevor Fay went to Capitol Hill to learn about a push to change that through the Clean Buses for Healthy Niños program.
But when Axel Vargas Sanchez looks at it, he sees a health hazard to kids. That's why he is working with the organization Chispa AZ to replace the diesel buses with a more eco-friendly alternative.
I ride the bus every day to school, as well as my little brother, and I want us to be in a safe environment and not have to breathe in any toxic air.
So Vargas and Chispa AZ want the state to replace old diesel-powered school buses with electric buses to reduce toxic emissions. They're calling on the state to use the $57 million it will receive from the settlement of a nationwide emissions lawsuit against Volkswagen.
Help us join this fight. Help us keep up the momentum that our communities have built and will continue to drive by working with your governors, asking your governors to use this VW settlement money for clean buses for healthy niños.
The League of Conservation Voters has Chispa chapters across the country pushing for clean buses from the total $2.7 billion settlement, which has to be used to clean the air. Vargas Sanchez said he and his classmates are going door to door with the fight.
I actually have a committee done in my high school, and we meet up every Wednesday, and we go out and canvass, we knock on doors, we make phone calls, and we get them to call Governor Doug Ducey and tell him that they want cleaner buses.
State officials have until mid-December to say how they'll spend the VW money. In the meantime, more than 21,000 Arizonans have signed a national Chispa petition calling for the electric switch. In Washington, Trevor Fay, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News. For top Arizona stories anytime, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and find us online at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.